Welcome to the Boat Buyer's Secret Weapon. I am your host, Captain Matt, and today we're talking MerCruiser versus Volvo Penta. Stern drives, IOs, inboard, outboards, whatever you want to call them. We are going to compare the two, and we'll start by the looks. You can always tell a Volvo, it's going to have the gray outdrive, and it's going to have the red engine block on the gas. We're not talking diesel, we're talking gas engines here. The MerCruiser, you're going to have the phantom black on the drive, and you're going to have the black engine block and engine. In 1907, Volvo Penta was started in Gothenburg, Sweden. The gas stern drives are built in Lexington, Tennessee. Now, Volvo has been probably the biggest innovator in the space. They started building stern drives. They were the first one to build them in 1959. MerCruiser passed on the opportunity. The CEO or the president at that time, they started building them 2 years later. They introduced the first dual prop in 82, the IPS pod drives in 2005, and then the forward-facing drive in 2015 to take advantage of the surf craze. They marinize GM blocks. So they take a GM engine and they marinize it. The same thing that MerCruiser did prior to 2015. They take a truck engine, and they get it set up and adjusted for the marine environment. So for the salt and the corrosion and the water and the moisture, and changing the way the power goes out to the lower unit. And they have three different styles, the SX, the DPS, and the OX. We'll talk about more of those in a second. Their newer models now have what's called the plate clutch. They call it the silent shift. Previously, they had the cone clutches, which are still very, very smooth shifting. In 2017, they went closed cooling standard on all Volvo drives, and the easy drain system, which makes it easy to get all of the water out of the heat exchange in this case, and get ready for use year round. Their Ocean X is their extra corrosion protection for in salt water. They've got a 2-year engine and drive warranty, or 600 hours. That's the best I could find. I found some varying information on a video from a Volvo rep, but the 2 years, 600 hours is I think is accurate. And then 3,500 dealers worldwide, and they do have a certified technician program. MerCruiser started in 1939 by Carl Kiekhaefer. In 61, they were bought by the Brunswick Corporation, who still owns them today, as well as a bunch of different boat brands, and they're built in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. They started in 2015 when the EPA put a bunch of restrictions on the auto industry and said, hey, there's more to come. The auto industry had to adjust the way they were building engines to hit emission standards. Their engines are built for a different environment. So 4 wheels on pavement versus going down water. On pavement, you start your momentum, and then it doesn't take much to get it going. The car engines with the transmissions, they run at very, very low RPMs compared to a boat. Going 70 miles an hour, you may be at 1,500, 2,000 RPMs on a car. If you're going 3/4 throttle on a boat going, let's say 35 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, you may be going 5,000 RPM, and 6,000 RPM is close to wide open throttle on some. So they're a little bit different, and MerCruiser said, hey, we're going to go ahead and make our own engine blocks. We're done using the GM autos, and we think it's a smarter strategic decision to build our own. We can build them specifically for the marine environment. We have the history of building our outboard blocks, so we think we can do it, and that's what they've been doing since 2005. Their drives are the Alpha, the Bravo 3, and the Bravo 4. The Bravo 4 is their new forward-facing drive. The Alpha has the dog clutch, and it's kind of notorious for clunking into gear. Nothing wrong with it. It's the right way it works, and there's nothing wrong with the boat if it does that, but it's a clunk, and if you don't know anything about boats, you may think there's a problem. The Bravo drive uses the cone clutch, which is much smoother. But again, I've driven Volvos, I've driven MerCruisers, and Volvo has almost always shifted smoother than the MerCruiser has. MerCruiser has their own alloy, XK360 aluminum alloy. It's highly corrosion resistant. They use that for the drives. They use that for their engine blocks, and it's something that they spend a lot of R&D money on. Closed cooling is an option, which means they're pulling water from the source that you're in, the lake, the ocean, the bay, whatever, pulling that up into the engine and cooling it is standard. Their closed cooling system, which Volvo, it's a standard thing to have closed cooling now since 2017, I think it was, is they pull in the water, you run it through a heat exchanger, which pulls in the raw water from the source and cools the coolant, and then the coolant goes and cools the engine. It's better for the engine, but it is a little bit more expensive. And C-Core is MerCruiser's corrosion protection system if you're leaving a boat in saltwater. Now, one advantage MerCruiser has is they are the exclusive stern drive provider for Tracker Marine, for all of Brunswick products, Sea Ray, Bayliner, anything that has a stern drive in it. And Crown Line also signed an exclusive in 2021, I believe. So the warranty, 2 years on the engine and drive, 3 years on the corrosion. Again, because of that aluminum alloy, they have a longer corrosion protection. And they have 5,000 dealers worldwide, but that also includes the Mercury and MerCruiser, and they have certified and master certified technicians, just like Volvo does, that can go through their training program and be kind of anointed by the brand that they know what they're doing working on your boat. I wanted to share some market share because this is a big thing that that you need to consider. And the best I could find was from 2004, this market survey that said Brunswick produces MerCruiser, at this time they were in Oklahoma, dominated the market with a 70% market share in the U.S. Now, here's the thing about that is the stern drive, mainly in the U.S. In the other parts of the world, they use a lot more diesel, they use more inboards, and obviously outboards as well. But in the U.S., because of our boating style, because of that diesel isn't as common, because of the types of boats that we prefer to use, stern drives are most popular in the U.S. But look at the sales numbers. In 97, there were 92,000 stern drives sold. In 2003, that number was down to 69,000. So that's the number that they were producing 70% of, so a pretty significant number. Now, in 2010, the EPA said, hey, we're going to adopt California's regulation for emissions on boats, and we're going to require that you have a catalytic converter. So in 2010, when I was selling boats at this time, I remember it distinctly, because you would have two exact boats sitting on the floor. One got an engine that was built before this requirement, and the other was built after, and there was a $3,000 difference from the one that had the catalytic converter to the one that didn't. So those were the ones that people were buying as the non-catalytic converter engine, because it was all about emissions. There was no performance difference. Excuse me. Matter of fact, some would say that they didn't perform as well, but they did have lower CO and other emissions. So that was regulated. All stern drives now have a catalytic converter. They got a little bit more expensive, which meant Outboards picked up, which meant that now, if you look at the number of stern drives on bow riders and cruisers, if you add these together, in 2020, about 11,000 stern drives were produced, okay? It's a ballpark compared to, what was it, 60, 70, 80, 90,000 in the 90s and early 2000s. A lot of it has to do with the EPA restrictions. A lot of it has to do with the advancements in higher horsepower for outboards. But the market has significantly changed. I'm not sure what the market share is today, but the market has definitely shrunk a ton. It's why when I recommend to people that are looking at used boats to look at a used stern drive, because there's so many more of them out there than there are older used pontoons. And if they've been well maintained, watch my used boat videos on that, but just something that's changed in the industry. So how do you compare a MerCruiser to a Volvo? Well, first you have to make sure that you're comparing the right drive and the right engine. So the Alpha 1 single prop compares to the Volvo SX single prop. The Bravo 3, the dual counter-rotating prop that Volvo introduced years and years ago, compares to the Volvo DP drive, their dual prop counter-rotating. The forward-facing drive, Bravo S drive, the Bravo 4S drive is their forward-facing, just came out this year, and the Volvo DP forward drive, they also do the SX in the forward drive, if you're putting that on a boat you want to surf behind. So those are the drives, but you also have to compare the engines. Remember, they've got their own drive technology, similar but different, and they also now, since 2015, have their own engines. Volvo marinizing a GM truck engine, MerCruiser making their own engine. So to compare the engines, the 3.0 no longer available, okay? They got rid of that because MerCruiser said we're not going to make that engine. So the V6 200 horse, the V6 250, and the V6 280 horse on Volvo, you can compare to the 4.5 liter V6 from MerCruiser at 200 and 250 horsepower. They don't have a 280 horsepower option at MerCruiser. The 6.2 liter V8, 300 and 350 horsepower, compares to the Volvo V8, 300 and 350. That's typically going to be on a Bravo 3 drive and the DPS, the dual props. The 8.3, 430 horsepower is equivalent to the Volvo 380 and 430 V8s. MerCruiser only having the 430 horsepower option. Volvo coming out with the 380 as well. And what they're doing is they're taking the same block and they're just making some adjustments to it to get more horsepower out of the higher horsepower, less horsepower, but the engines themselves are the same. The blocks themselves are the same. And again, GM block, which has been the industry standard since the beginning, to 2015. Now MerCruiser is building their own blocks. Who made the right choice? We still, again, I couldn't find market share numbers, so I'm not sure who's winning that battle. My gut tells me that MerCruiser is still winning because they've got guaranteed transoms. Every C-Ray, every Bayliner, every Crown Line, every Tahoe by Tracker has a MerCruiser engine on it. Volvo, the engine brands are going to, if you buy a Cobalt or a Chaparral or a Regal, you can get a Volvo or a MerCruiser, okay? And that'll be important as we get into comparing the two. So if you're looking at them side by side, well, marine specific engine blocks versus automotive blocks modified for the marine environment, marinized. Advantages, well, MerCruiser was able to build their engine block specifically to fit in a boat, to be maintained in a boat, and to keep the sound as low as possible in a boat. Volvo is taking the GM blocks. GM has much more advanced technology for the engine themselves, variable valve timing, as well as all of the other kind of electronic things that they're doing to get the most out of the engine. What's interesting is I don't know which is better yet. It's really hard to tell. When you run them, and I've run both of them, is you're not going to notice a different boat to boat. I don't even know if you ran a Volvo and then you ran the equivalent MerCruiser setup on the same boat immediately after, I don't know that you would notice much difference, okay? MerCruiser, more dealers worldwide. Volvo, less dealers worldwide by about 1,500. Parts availability, well, before 2015, pretty equivalent. Volvo parts were maybe a little bit more difficult to come by because they had smaller market share and not everybody carried them. But in 2015, as long as MerCruiser continues to build the blocks and continues to keep going as they are, those parts will be easily available. If for some reason something happened and they got out of the stern drive market, it could make it more difficult. Just sort of a risk that's out there. I don't think it's big, but worth mentioning. Volvo, as with older MerCruisers, be aware of cheap automotive replacement parts, okay? Because they're GM engines, you can say, oh, I can use an automotive part and not have to pay the extra to get a MerCruiser or a Volvo part because it's a GM block. There are some things that you absolutely 100 must. It's a huge safety risk, especially with electronic components, starters, alternators, things like that, where there might be a spark. Because that engine is in the engine compartment, there could be fumes and that spark could cause an explosion. It's important to not be cheap and go with auto parts, okay? MerCruiser, the OEM parts traditionally have been less expensive. Volvo traditionally has been more expensive. I think that's still true today. On the MerCruiser, the gear lube, which lubricates the lower unit, is easier to check. They have a reservoir inside the boat attached to the engine. It's clear. You can look at it. Is it lined up? And you know exactly it's easy to add. Volvo says, hey, that's great, but now there's more opportunity for leaks. We're going to put the dipstick on the back of the drive, which means it's less likely to leak, but it means you can't check it if you're in the water. I wouldn't even check it on a lift. I was using my father-in-law's Cobalt. It's got the dipstick on the back. I thought it looked like there may be a leak in the gear lube, but it was on the lift. I wasn't going to take that dipstick off and chance getting water in there or dropping the dipstick. So it's more difficult in that situation, although less likely to leak. The impeller on the Alpha, you have to remove the drive to get that to that impeller. On a Volvo, it's inside the boat. and it's easier to get to and change that impeller. Bravo 3 does it the same way. That impeller is on the inside of the boat and not in the drive, okay? So the Alpha, I think, is easier to maintain the impeller than the Volvo SX. The Bravo and the DP are equivalent, essentially. 2015, MerCruiser introduced what they call a season extender. They do it different on the Alpha and the Bravo, but it's an easier way to get the water out of the engine to avoid freeze damage. Now, I say basic winterization because it's only getting the water out. That's all. Volvo, in 2017, they introduced the simple winterization process. They call it the easy drain system because they're all close-cooled in that period. It's real simple. It's all you got to do is empty that heat exchanger and get that water out. You push a plunger, boom, it all drains out through a manifold, done. So nice and easy. Previous to that, they all had to be winterized. And in the cold environments, I would run the pink biodegradable antifreeze through either system. But they do have those easier systems now to extend the season for you before you put it up for good. MerCruiser, closed cooling is an option on the Bravo and the Alpha. Remember, closed cooling means it works like a radiator in your car. Raw water cooled means it's picking up from the water source that the boat is in and pulling it in. It matters in salt water especially. Salt water, you're pulling that water up and into the engine block to cool it, and you've got riser and manifold issue by getting all that corrosion and salt in there. The closed cooling that Volvo has as standard reduces that issue because it's only pulling into a heat exchanger. That antifreeze, essentially, that cooling fluid, is running through that heat exchanger to cool down and then back to the engine. So in salt water, the salt's only getting into that heat exchanger. Easier to maintain, less likely to have issues, and if there are issues, they're less costly. MerCruiser, 2-year warranty, 3-year corrosion. Volvo, 2-year warranty, 600-hour, 2-year corrosion. So corrosion is not as warranted on the Volvo for as long. So MerCruiser, well, they win on more dealers, but more dealers is a local thing, right? We'll talk about that more in just a little bit. OEM parts, traditionally less expensive. Gear lube, easier to check. I like that. Volvo, impeller, easier to change. And the closed cooling. There's only advantages to having a closed cooling system other than cost. And for Volvo, it's standard. So when you're comparing engine to engine, which we'll do that in just a second, but essentially both are very reliable engines and drives. You know, they've been doing it a long time. They're on thousands and thousands of boats out there, and they're proven technology. And but they need to be maintained, both of them, and they both need to be maintained very similarly. Now, Volvo talks about they've got a better torque curve through the mid RPM ranges where boats kind of do most of their running, and it shows that you're getting a pretty flat line, which means at 2,500 RPMs to, let's say, 4,600 RPM, you're getting a pretty consistent push of horsepower. I was not able to find this information for MerCruiser. I found some information older to when they started building the blocks, but it tells me that Volvo marketing message is probably accurate, that they put out more torque. Torque is about getting up and on plane. Horsepower is about speed, okay? So and again, I haven't tested this side by side, but if you were to go MerCruiser versus Volvo on the same boat, same setup, you would likely find the Volvo would probably get on plane slightly faster than the MerCruiser. If you ran them side by side, I'm not sure you could tell, but the torque curve says they probably do a better job at that. So how do you decide which is right for you? Well, here's my belief. You go by price, and you go by expert service in your local area. What I mean by that is, are there enough Volvo technicians that are certified that can handle your service needs? Are there enough MerCruiser technicians that can handle your service needs? If I'm buying from a dealer and they offer both Volvo and MerCruiser, I'm going to ask them how many of your technicians are certified by Volvo, how many are certified by MerCruiser, and if I don't have a dealer and I'm buying a used boat, I'm going to find somebody in the market area. Are you a certified Volvo tech? Are you a certified MerCruiser tech? And I want to make sure I've got support. My story, my brother bought a Volvo, and when he brought it home, the first time he tried to get service on it, there was nobody in the market area that would service a Volvo drive. He was in Omaha, Nebraska, a smaller market area, and nobody would work on a Volvo drive. Now, in my area, I'm in the Carolinas, there's almost every dealer that's not Brunswick focus orders their boats with Volvos on them. There's a ton of Volvo mechanics in my area, so it's not an issue. But make sure you've got service for whatever drive it is, and make sure there's more than just one or two in case they move or they do a terrible job or they're not reliable or they're filled up, they're too high demand and you can't get in. That's a key area on how I would make my decision: price and expert service. So let's look at price. Well, if we compare the Volvo V8 300 dual prop to a MerCruiser 300 Bravo 3, we find that they're within $600 of each other on this Cobalt. Volvo V8 430 horsepower to a MerCruiser 430 horsepower Bravo 3. They're, what is that, $1,300 difference, $1,400 difference or so. So there's a slight price difference in those. Seacor 4,600 versus Ocean X 2,900. Remember, extra corrosion protection. So you can do this on virtually any manufacturer site to decide, should I get a Volvo or should I get a MerCruiser if you're ordering the boat. If the dealer's doing it in inventory, they probably order them all the same. So they probably order all Volvo or all MerCruiser and talk to them about which one they have more experience servicing, okay? Let's look at a GLASTRON. Let's look at the 200 horsepower Alpha 1 versus the 200 horsepower SX single prop. 4,600 or 46,000 versus 48,500. So there the Volvo is what, $2,500 more expensive? The 250 Alpha, 250 SX, we are 51,600 and 50,600. So we're $1,000 more on the Volvo versus the MerCruiser on that one. It's really easy to compare these two, and now you know the Volvo closed cooling is standard. MerCruiser, it's an option, so you have to decide if you want to add that. Let's look at the 250 forward drives. This is on a 4Winds, 94,500 compared to the Volvo 280 horsepower forward drive, 95,790. So a little bit more expensive on the Volvo, but a little bit more horsepower on the forward drive. MerCruiser, the Bravo 3 forward drive on a 300 horse, 102,685 versus, I don't know what happened to my voice there, 300 horsepower Volvo on the forward drive, 101,100. The MerCruiser is a little bit more expensive. So it's going to vary. It's going to vary based on the engine, the drive, the horsepower. And then if you need that closed cooling, because if you're in saltwater, you absolutely need it. If you're in saltwater, I would highly consider looking at an outboard or a true inboard boat. Now, what if you're looking used? So we talked about 2015 is when they kind of diverge from the GM blocks. Well, if you're buying a used boat, one, go watch all of my used boat videos for the style that you're looking at. The engine history and the maintenance and the use is the most important, okay? That is number one. If it's not maintained, it's not the boat you want to buy. Number two is availability of expert service in your area. So don't be like my brother and get stuck with the Volvo in an area where there's no Volvo technicians. There's a lot more MerCruiser techs overall, but if there, and it's unlikely because MerCruiser, I believe the market share is still over, but in history it has been. So there's just by nature more MerCruiser technicians out there that are certified in master techs, but it doesn't matter in the worldwide. What matters is where you boat in the service department that's convenient to do, that has a good reputation, is going to take care of you. Do they have certified and or master certified Volvo or MerCruiser technicians? That will help you decide. And then is the horsepower adequate for the boat size and use? If the horsepower is too low, I don't care what the drive is, I'm going to walk away from that boat. And then also make sure, if you haven't watched my boats to avoid, don't buy these 8 boats. The Volvo XDP drive, it's a composite drive they put out in the mid 2000s, late 2000s. Stay away from that at all costs. Do a Google search on XDP drives and you'll find out the class action lawsuits. Stay away from it at all costs. It's not worth it, no matter the deal. And you'll be avoiding a huge headache. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you're buying a boat, grab that Boat Buyer Super Weapon Toolkit. It's free, boatbuyerSecretWeapon.com/toolkit. And remember, life truly is better on a boat.